Hello, everyone, and welcome to Monbiosis on COP26.tv. And today we're talking about the false solutions to climate breakdown, solutions which could be even worse than the problems they claim to solve. And top of my list are two which are being pushed very hard at the climate talks by lobbyists. One of those is bioenergy, biofuels, biomass, which basically means living plant material as a substitute for fossil plant material. And the other is fracked fossil gas. People talk about natural gas. We should call it fossil gas. Methane coming out of geological formations, often being produced by means of fracking as the great alternative to coal. And we're very lucky to have three amazing speakers yet again on our program. Always, we seem to have the best contributors. I'm constantly honored by the people who are prepared to come on and talk to me here. We have Maya Menezes, we have Anne-Marie Botsky, and later on, we're bringing in Josh Fox. It's very early in the morning in the US, so he's going to join us a little later in the program. So if I could start with you, Maya, tell me about your work and how it's relevant to this topic.
Definitely. Thank you so much for having me. So my name is Maya Menezes. I'm a senior forest campaigner at Stand.earth. But I'm a new kind of to the forest campaigning scene. I used to work for the LEAP as the director of programs. So we did global kind of climate action. And what is, I have just a list of things I'm enraged about bioenergy expansion at the COP. But the reason it's so, relevant right now is because there's the whole COP is about the race off of fossil fuels, and it is a frantic race for the finish line at this point. And I say frantic because people are in countries, states, companies are so desperate to lower their emissions that they're willing to do it even if it's fake. And that's really what bioenergy is, specifically with biomass. So biomass is being welcomed as the solution to coal, which is a very important part here. And the solution to coal in many companies' eyes is for the transition of coal plants to biomass plants, forest biomass plants. So these coal plants that have been making billions of dollars for many, many years off of burning fossil fuels are being subsidized by governments to transition to burning wood, which is obscene on so many different levels. The first is that the science now is very clear that burning wood at the smokestack is actually dirtier than coal. We know that. The second thing is, of course, that not only are you depleting a resource that is not actually renewable, because you cannot cut down a 500-year-old tree and then plant a 500-year-old tree, but you're decimating delicate ecosystems that are in many ways, and many scientists will tell you, forests are our best offense and defense to climate action. And the next thing that makes it really relevant here is that, and this is kind of my talking point on this, because I think it's so important to draw this connection, is that when we're talking about subsidies for fossil fuel companies, I'm calling forest biomass a fossil fuel company in a trench coat, because I think that's exactly what it is. The subsidies, when you're talking about convincing people that, when we were convincing people that coal is dangerous, that oil is dangerous, that natural gas is dangerous, it was less difficult to convince people that these were poisonous industries than it was that it was a smart economic decision to divest from them. And as we race towards subsidizing bioenergy, we're realizing it is going to take precious years that we do not have to get financial institutions to pull their funding from this industry in the few years that we have to invest in wartime-like investments in wind, solar, and tidal. And so this race to get the UK government specifically to divest from companies like Drax, where they're pouring almost £1 billion a year into, is really where the campaign crux is right now.
Thank you very much, Maya. That's a great introduction. And Anne-Marie, could you introduce us to this other false solution, which is dragging up fossil gas from geological strata as an apparent substitute for coal?
Sure. Thank you also so much for having me on the show and for drawing attention to these super false solutions, actually. Yeah, I am a climate activist and I'm a campaigner with We Move Europe. So I focus very much on the EU decisions that are being taken, the crucial climate decisions. And in the EU right now, the politicians, the decision makers are falling for the gas lobby's narrative that gas is the bridge fuel and that it is natural and green and safe. And we're actually at a crossroad where they are deciding right now to give gas a green label in the financial rule book that is being written right now in Europe. And also pouring billions into new infrastructure projects, into new pipelines, into new LNG terminals, which would then import fracked gas, for example, from the US, from South America, from other countries. So fracking, there's been a long struggle and fight going on in Europe to stop fracking by lots of people on the ground that want to stop this destructive industry. But yet we're building import terminals to then import it from somewhere else. There's German companies and really a whole consortium of global companies, for example, fracking in Argentina, destroying the landscape, that is having devastating impacts on people on the ground, on the communities, the people living there. Fracking there and then importing it to Europe and calling that, that is nowhere near any kind of climate solution. And this is the decisions right now are, especially on the financial framework. If the EU now, this is a really hot topic right now, if the EU now decides to call gas green, this will have devastating impacts on the financial industry around the world. They have basically a huge excuse to just say, yes, we will keep investing into gas, it's green, the EU said so, and then we will have more and more pipelines, terminals, gas power plants. And we need to really, as activists and society, be loud and stop this. But I think there's still a long way to go for people to really understand how dangerous gas really is, and how in the recent years, because the industry grew, what that has meant for methane emissions across the world. Also here, it has always been labeled as greener than coal or cleaner than coal. And if you really look at the emissions along the production scale, all the flaring and all the release of the gas along the production line, it is not cleaner. It is super dangerous right now. And it's a crucial time to say no to gas right now.
So just to stay with you for a moment, Anne-Marie, we often are told, well, how can we possibly keep the lights on if we don't switch to fossil gas? We're switching away from coal. We have to switch to something.
Yeah, it's quite funny. We are actually doing the campaigning. This is an actual worry of a lot of people, and I think we have to be honest about it. And as campaigners and activists, we have to also really offer solutions and show what is the other way, not just how to keep the lights on, but how to heat our houses. And there's a long way to go for like a heating transition. And the same goes actually for biomass. Lots of countries in Europe are using biomass and thinking this is burning wood is a solution. But of course, we have gas infrastructure. We need to think about how to wind that down. We need a concrete plan. We need a concrete plan on alternatives. But also every penny, or actually every billion spent on gas infrastructure right now is not being spent on solar and wind. And we need to ramp that up. And we know we need to ramp that up and really increase solar, wind, heat pumps, and give incentives to people to have green solutions. But yet the money is flowing into new infrastructure projects, which we really don't need and which will become stranded investments. So this is just burning our money. Like just one example, in Germany, we have a massive pipeline, the Nord Stream pipeline, and the German government goes ahead and builds another one, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which is the biggest fossil emission project in Europe right now. We can still stop it. And there's legal challenges to this project, but like why in a climate crisis where we are reaching tipping points, are we building these massive gas projects? It's really unbelievable.
Maya, the term biomass or biofuel or bioenergy, it sort of distances people from what we're really talking about, doesn't it? So tell me about exactly what these terms mean. and exactly what the ecosystems we're talking about, which are being risked by or being threatened by the development of this new industry.
Definitely. Well, bioenergy is such a, as you named, such an interesting word to use when you're talking about energy solutions. It does denote a certain greenness to it, which I'm sure is no accident. This is some expert level greenwashing. I mean, I think one of the infuriating things about also these subsidy programs is that they fund the PR campaigns. A huge amount of money is going towards these PR campaigns to discredit scientists, advocates, and communities. And that is very difficult when we have to use this language. So I think bioenergy just refers to the fact that these energies are found in the natural world. That doesn't always mean that they can regrow. That doesn't always mean that they can come back the way they were before. It just means that they're found in nature, which is such a expertly executed PR campaign and choice of words. But in respect to what is at risk, the stakes have never been higher. The World Wildlife Fund, actually this morning, World Wildlife Fund Canada released one of the most detailed soil carbon maps that has ever been done in Canada. And I encourage everyone to look at it. It really digs into forest carbon and soil carbon. And when we're talking about wood pellet creation, which is specifically what is feeding the biomass industry, we're not only talking about the trees themselves, which, truly horrifically, we have drone footage at Stand.earth where we found out that these companies are not collecting. My colleague Mary Booth said recently that no biomass, no cursory understanding of biomass would believe that multi-billion-dollar companies are foraging for pine cones and pine needles for industrial burning. And that's what they'd have you believe. So we have drone footage in British Columbia that these companies are taking whole trees, not only whole trees, but they're implicating old growth forests, which in Canada has had some of the biggest protests that we have ever had in our history, protecting old growth trees. So we know that they're taking full logs. We know that they're getting into areas that are impacting old growth forests, but also they're disturbing soil carbon. And in Canada specifically, a whopping 384 billion tons of our carbon stores are in soil. And when you disturb the forest, you disturb that soil. And so that is what at stake. Entire ecosystems are at stake. Our watersheds flow through our forests in Canada. And when you cross the northern boundary in Canada, all rivers flow north and south to the Arctic. So these, the ecological implications of this cannot be understated. But in addition to that, the places where wood is being burned, specifically also in the southern United States, these stations are positioned quite purposefully, as it often is, near Black communities, near poor communities, near working class communities, where the particulate matter is poisoning people. So, there's the ecological implications, there's the social justice, racial justice, working class justice implications, but we cannot get these forests back. And in some places, the growing cycle is 500 years. We're predicting not to make it into the next 5 years without ecological collapse if we continue down the path that we are. So
there's a very strong parallel between what you're both saying. That on the one hand, you've got this projection of these green fuels, which are going to get us, going to be the bridge which make the transition towards the new energy economies that we need to see. But in both cases, they turn out to be at least as bad and possibly worse than the fuels they're intended to replace, Maya. And it's interesting that even in carbon terms, as both of you have spelt out, we're looking potentially at greater carbon emissions from these new fuels than there were from the old ones. Maya, could you just add something about the carbon implications there? Sorry.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is carbon that we cannot sequester at this pace. And I will kind of get into a little bit the carbon capture systems, because it is maybe the most insidious part of all of this. In the bioenergy and biomass sector specifically, these corporations are betting on a technology called BECCS, bioenergy carbon capture systems. And these are hypothetical modeling. They have not been activated, they have not been working, and they're being used to justify the level of burning, the level of carbon release that these companies are following through with. Betting our lives on hypothetical modeling is the height of insanity. And moreover, we already have the most advanced carbon sequestration systems in our known universe, and they're called standing forests. There's no reason why we need to, this is, Anne-Marie, you were touching on this earlier, but the production that is being ramped up, the permits that are being released for more exploration, we don't have room for carbon in the atmosphere to the tune of the permits that are out there. And so the transition to green energy and talking about the carbon release and this, lattice work of trading systems to allow fundamentally business to continue as usual is what we also must challenge in our language. Obviously, the ways in which we live our lives need to change. Everyone can't have an electric car. Everyone can't live in a 5-star gutted house that will allow them to survive anything. We have to have lifestyle changes that prioritize the most vulnerable in our world. And the bioenergy sector is saying that they're going to solve that, and they're not. So, we have to challenge so many levels of inequality that are allowing this industry to lie to us. Yeah.
Anne-Marie, one of these lies is this illusory promise that eventually there'll be carbon capture and storage, which sounds to me like, carry on smoking, because eventually there'll be a cure for lung cancer. And this has been a dominant theme, hasn't it? Both with bioenergy and with fracked fossil gas.
Yeah, there's the industries use these fairy tale stories to really justify just producing dirty energy. We can also not just see that with carbon capture and storage, which is a big promise that eventually we'll suck the emissions out and bury them somewhere. But also the gas industry is going for the hydrogen hype right now. So there's, it's really hard to, it's very energy intensive and very hard to produce actually clean hydrogen. I mean, maybe it can play a role, but they're really just using this as an excuse to build new pipelines. And then eventually hydrogen will flow through it. And then there's brown and like blue and gray, and there's all sorts of like dirty hydrogen. That's the majority. There's a little bit of maybe green hydrogen, but this is also the next thing they're using really as a massive loop or backdoor entrance to build new infrastructure, and then eventually green gas will flow through these pipelines, which is it's another one of these false solutions. So it's but yeah, just if I can also touch up not just on the gas thing, but also on the biomass situation in Europe, because this is so interesting. When I found out, and I've been kind of working on energy for quite a while, and I found out that most of the renewable energy in Europe actually comes from burning biomass. I found that quite shocking. Around 60% of the renewable energy comes actually from burning biomass. So Europe is presenting itself as this champion of clean energy and climate targets, and then actually we're burning crops and we're burning forests. We're importing them also from Canada, from the US, like importing trees and pallets, but also we're cutting down the forest. In Sweden is really big, Finland is really big. It has huge implications on the Sami indigenous communities in the north of Europe. We're really losing our forests that are the buffer. And also in Germany, for example, exactly what you're talking about, George, is like turning coal plants into burning our forest now. How is that a good idea? Like, and giving subsidies to this and creating another, like we've seen the impacts that drugs has had in the UK. This doesn't work. This isn't a clean solution. Yet Germany is now thinking about turning coal plants into forest burning plants. And it's very shocking trends. But what gives me hope is that actually it is like, if we do put this on the agenda, on the desk of policymakers, if we really increase the pressure, and it's very hard to compete with the industries that are spending billions on this, obviously, but they can say in Europe, burning biomass, burning our forest is declared renewable energy. Like this is not, you know, it has the label of renewable energy. So billions of subsidies are flowing into this as well. So we can stop this. Like this is a decision on the table right now. So for me as a campaigner, this kind of gives me hope. There are these clear decisions. So if we exert pressure now, let's try to stop the worst right now.
Yes, thank you, Anne-Marie. And to stay with you just for a moment, one thing which constantly amazes me is that people such as yourselves have so clearly and cogently, as you're doing on this program, spelt out the case against these so-called miracle fuels and how utterly disastrous they are. It's been happening for years now. People have been showing what is wrong with it, and yet the policy sticks with them. That's what I don't understand. What's going through the heads of European governments?
I wonder as well. I wonder as well. And also, if you're in a position where you're supposed to take long-term decisions for society that has implications for our future, people need to really look at the science more than going to industry events and being on this lobby level and listening to an industry that has a profit interest. So on labeling this decision for the EU to label biomass as renewable energy, that was a disastrous decision. We've then, burning crops, burning food, actually, and calling that energy. And then you need to, let's say you didn't know, but then you see the implications, reverse that as quickly as you can. Same as with the gas industry. I mean, we do see that this massive PR campaign, gas is green, gas is natural, it's needed, that is not only in the head of the policymakers, it is in the heads of many, many people that don't know. And I think it's still going to be, I'm glad NGOs are working on this right now. Environmental movements have focused very long on coal, rightly so, but gas was kind of like neglected. And I think it has really benefited the gas industry to build up this empire. And obviously it's a lot of times the same companies and use this space. It's really a narrative war, let's say. One side is very well funded and we have to do a lot of work to convince people, show the alternatives, and really put this on the desks of decision makers. Sometimes they don't know. They should be better informed. Sometimes they don't know. Sometimes they're just really clearly working with the lobby. Like some rapporteurs, some decision makers have clear ties to the industry and they have a clear interest in pushing these solutions. Sorry.
One of the many good points there that Anne-Marie makes, Maya, is that the big NGOs have taken a long time, some of them, to switch on to this. I remember I was first writing about this issue in 2004, and there were really a small handful of us, and we were generally in, it was people in some micro groups which were really specialized on this issue, but we couldn't get the penetration into the big NGOs. Why do you think they've taken so long to see it?
I think the world of NGOs is like it's the critical, underfunding, overworked, always in a race to respond to industry. And I think that's always the big fault of our movement in a lot of ways. We're in a constant call and response with a PR machine that is working with the amount of money, time, and space that so many of us just do not have. And I think that's what we actually need to break out of in order to fight this industry head on. We don't need to wait for them to produce some false declaration on saving the world for us to decide what our response to them is going to be. And in a lot of ways, we've had conversations this COP about, we've had a lot of Indigenous communities talking about nature-based solutions as another way to reframe land grabs. We talked a lot about the rights of poor communities to be able to live in their homes safely, as, we have to respond to it as emergency response instead of the fact that they have a right to live on their land in a safe way. And I think that if we can change our tactics in that way and stop responding to industry and instead build an offensive movement, I think that's where NGOs are finally starting to come around a little bit. So we're realizing that tactic is not working. It's not working and it's slowing us down. Mm-hmm.
And so what should global citizens do, Maya, to basically get everyone's minds focused on the enormous danger of these false solutions?
the easy questions this morning. I really think that people need to get very informed about where your energy is coming from. The strongest social movements happen in place-based areas, where you live, where you get your energy, what affects the communities around you, whose indigenous land that you're on, how your decisions are affecting the global economy. These are things that we can get informed about, very informed about. I was at a beautiful direct action with Biofuel Watch and Extinction Rebellion and our other allies who've been working on the biomass issue, specifically with Drax, where we were blockading the World Bioenergy Association's event, where they were clapping each other on the back for the Glasgow Declaration and saying, we're the leaders in green energy. We scared the bejesus out of those guys. They wouldn't be able to, they wouldn't leave the building, they wouldn't come in, they canceled events, and that was a big coalescing of organizers and activists from all over Europe, from all over the US and Canada. And we all met in the street for the first time and got to talk to each other about how this is affecting us in our communities and how we're going to double down on building stronger relationships with each other so that our feedback loop is tighter, so that we know if something happens and we know how to frame this in our homes. And I think that's the type of public education and solidarity building that we will need to take this industry on head on.
And Anne-Marie, do you see such movements building at sufficient speed in Europe?
Yes, no, because in the last few years we should have done a lot more. And the movements really play a crucial role here, because also to your question about the role of NGOs, a lot of them will do campaigns that fly with people, that people like. And some topics are hard, they're technical, and people are not convinced yet. They're really the hard ones, where we really have to change the story and we have to convince people. And we have to be honest about NGOs are doing campaigns that are going well, and they're depending on funding and donations from people. So this is a problem, whereas Extinction Rebellion and other movements are free, they're independent, and they can really point the finger to the things that are that need to be said, no matter the consequences for them. And I think this plays a really crucial role, especially on breaking the gas narrative. In Germany, we've seen big direct actions, for example, from Ende Gelände. They blocked a project that is supposed to be built in the north, another LNG terminal to import fracked gas. We see some action against Wintershall, which is, nobody knows them, but they're like the biggest oil and gas producer here in Germany. And across Europe, obviously, it was activists that stopped like new LNG terminals. It wasn't the governments, it was activists in Ireland, in Spain, that have stopped these projects. So yes, like the movements definitely play a crucial role. And where I see NGOs as well, and where I want to see more is like showing people an alternative. How do we then heat our home? What does community energy look like? What do I have to do to switch? What are the benefits for me as well? How can I get engaged in my city? We need district heating plans. Like, what is a heat pump? Like, how do we actually do this? And I think most of us are like not even educated enough, me included, in how this transition should actually work in different regions. Like, how does the heat transition actually work? So I really see like we need more activists on the street pushing for these topics, like no matter like who they, piss off, like that's really important. And the NGOs need to really show clear solutions and educate people and bring them behind these topics, no matter if they're popular or not.
Maya Menezes, Anne-Marie Botsky, thank you for two fantastic contributions. Now, I'm very pleased indeed to be able to talk to Josh Fox, who is very well known for his famous film Gasland, Oscar-nominated, Emmy-winning film, which made a massive impact on people around the world, showing the reality of gas fracking, what it really means for the communities it affects. So Josh, start us off by telling me what you've been doing since Gasland and how you've pursued this theme.
Well, thank you so much, George. First of all, it's great to be on with you. I'm a huge fan of your work. So Gasland was an international success. It was on HBO in the United States, but then also in 32 countries worldwide. And I think since the success and the impact of that film and my touring worldwide to over 500 cities, basically to meet with people in the movement to try to gather support in local communities against fracking, I made Gasland Part 2, and I made a film called How to Let Go of the World and Love All the Things Climate Can't Change, also both premiered here in the United States and premiered at Sundance Film Festival and nominated for Emmys. But the international community, or rather the conglomerates that control media, didn't bring those films to the rest of the world. I also made a film called Awake, A Dream from Standing Rock, which is one of the major films to come out about the uprising at Standing Rock, and that was on Netflix worldwide. So, I think that in spite of the success of Gasland, the rest of the world didn't get to see the next couple of films that I put out that have been equally successful. But the idea of working with communities on the ground to stop fracking or to stop fossil fuel infrastructure is one that I think is working worldwide, but we need to see that penetrate things like COP. We need to see that there is a structure of power that is like listening to the structures of power that are emerging from the grassroots movements around the world. And that's what I think that's what I'm most worried about right now that I'm not seeing happen.
So you've probably met more anti-fracking communities than anyone else on earth on those great travels and the work, the filming that you've been making. What have you picked up from them in terms of the prospect of stopping this blight on the planet?
Well, I think that it's that old slogan, think globally, act locally. The anti-fracking movement, and I'm not taking credit for this, but it's the credit of the organizers on the ground that are assembling to stop fracking in their own communities, are probably responsible for keeping more carbon and methane in the ground than most of the sectors of our climate movement, because we're focused on the places where we live. And that's an amazing thing, because, for example, here in New York State, we have a ban on fracking. In the Upper Delaware River Basin in Pennsylvania, where the films are located that start where I live, where it starts, we have a ban on fracking. We have bans on fracking in many countries in Europe and many states in the United States. And we're seeing local movements. I know you had Ina Maria Chikango on your program trying to stop fracking in Namibia. So what we have to see are these structures like COP, where people are within governments. They're actually trying to do things to stop climate change, work in solidarity with the movements on the ground, rather than this continual feeling of opposition, which we're seeing all over and over and over again, right? So we know where the people are. The people want to stop fossil fuels. The people want to transition to renewable energy. The people want a stable climate future, but somehow there is this disconnect between our so-called democracies, or our so-called systems of representative of government, and the actual power that's happening in the streets. Why this happens over and over again in every single sector of our political life, I don't understand. And we are at a logjam in this way. So when I see COP happening and there's something going on inside of those hallowed halls and people in there doing something, and then outside is everybody that I know, and they're in the streets protesting, it's disheartening that there is a structure in the world that has emerged to take on fossil fuels and actually change the world, which is a global structure. And at the same time, that structure has not been invited inside the hallowed halls of places like COP or the United States government, or it always seems to be existing in opposition to the forces that are stating the same objectives, which of course we know is what we call greenwashing.
So how do we turn this global movement into a global ban on fracking, which I think everyone in this program will agree is what we urgently need?
Well, let's make it clear. Fracking represents about 90% of all oil and gas production on the planet right now. If we're talking about gas, we're talking about it's fracked gas. So when we say a ban on fracking, that means no new drilling, no new wells, no new production, which would make a lot of sense considering we have to try to scale back emissions. One thing that is hopeful is that during the beginnings of the coronavirus crisis, for example, in the United States, we saw a way forward. We reduced emissions in the United States by 20% during the beginning of the COVID crisis, and over the year, probably about 7%. That's what we need to do every single year to have a stable climate in the future. So we saw a path forward. We see that people should not be commuting to work. They should be doing it on Zoom, or they should be working from home. We saw that that cities can reinvent themselves with bike lanes and without cars. We saw that this so-called downturn in the global economy meant that we could stabilize the climate. And lo and behold, the skies turned blue again, and you could see things that were actually rebounding in this thing that we call the planet Earth. So we know where we need to go. the issue right now, in my view, is that we don't have democracies worldwide. We are living in a state of oligarchy. That is certainly true in the United States. In the United States, we don't have what we call representative democracy. We have one person, Joe Manchin, who is a coal baron, able to block the climate legislation, even the meager, moderate climate legislation of a person like Joe Biden that most of America agrees with, certainly everybody in his party agrees with, but he's able to block it because that's the system that we have in place. We have no less task than defeating this oligarchic economic system, which goes hand in hand with emissions.
So fundamentally, the fight for a habitable planet is a fight for democracy.
And it's a fight for against colonialism. I mean, what we're seeing here is a 500-year experiment where we treat the Earth as an extraction zone for the benefit of the hierarchical class that siphons all the wealth up to the 1%. Every single billionaire is a policy failure, and it's also a climate failure. So what we're talking about is a world where we can't divorce climate from the rest of the model. We can't say, oh, this is how we reduce emissions. We have to start talking about systemic change. And that's what's happening in the streets. The big question is, are our forms of protest right now, and are our forms of working with a system that is increasingly ignoring us up to the task of influencing that system, which is increasingly further and further away from us? So I think that's the challenge of movements right now, because we saw 10 years ago, right, that we could actually at local levels ban fracking, and we did so. But now we're seeing how that system has moved and changed and become something a little bit more wily and tenacious to move away from the systems of power that we created. But we know, listen, in 2011, I co-founded a group called the Solutions Project with Mark Jacobson from Stanford, Mark Ruffalo, the actor, Marco Krapels, a banker. And we laid out, or rather Jacobson from his science from Stanford University, laid out how the world could transition to 100% renewable energy, to wind, sun, and water. That is a transition that took place without batteries, without fossil fuels, without nuclear. So the plans exist. The science exists. It existed 10 years ago. Now, this is during the Obama administration. You would think that Barack Obama just spoke at COP. But the problem is that people like Barack Obama, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden are all pro-fracking. We did see in the United States something incredibly hopeful, which was the movement to elect Bernie Sanders, who actually had a very realistic viewpoint about how we could defeat climate change. It was called the Green New Deal, a climate core of our citizenry. So we're seeing, but what we need is that crucial breakthrough, either through democracy or through protest that says we are not going to take this anymore. We need to have power in government representing us, representing the movement. Why am I not at COP right now? Why are you not at COP right now? Why isn't the leadership from Standing Rock at COP right now? Why aren't the Pacific Climate Warriors who impacted Paris 6 years ago? Why are they not on the dais at COP? I don't understand this. So we have to call these structures out as fake, as greenwashing. You have Jeff Bezos speaking at COP. It's ridiculous. It makes the entire thing into a sham.
Josh, thank you so much for a very articulate and persuasive contribution to our program. Much appreciated, and a great way to end this episode of Monbiosis. Please stick with us on cop26.tv. If you want to see other episodes of Monbiosis, they're all now online at cop26.tv/Monbiosis. Not difficult to find.